if people want to just raise their hands, use the raised hand. Yeah, exactly. We will get to those questions. So, Kendra, if you want to unmute yourself and we'll take a question.
Sure.
We're
Yeah, thank you so much for the talk. It's been so interesting. I've been excited to hear both of you speak for a while now. I'm a fifth year doctoral student in the Adelphi program,
Mhm.
and I'm on an internship split at White and Silver Hill Hospital in Connecticut. And at Silver Hill, I'm working in the house that's dedicated to like psychotic disorders. So it's been really I sort of am already inspired to work with this population. You said you sort of hinted at this a little bit with talking about the importance of sort of being with the patient, just kind of sitting there with them. I'm wondering, I feel like, and I think Chestnut Lodge sort of started, and Harry Stack Sullivan sort of tried to get at this idea of connection. But for me, what I'm seeing is if I had to pick one thing that's happening, sort of one issue, is that there's a problem connection, right? I think of sort of, right, our five senses connect us to the external world, and then language connects us to other people. But with the senses sort of glitching, having auditory or visual hallucinations, those sort of break down, and then and language can often be, I think of sort of like word salad or things that sort of don't seem to make sense in a traditional way. So I'm just wondering if you see sort of connection at the core in a sense of what's happening, and seeking, I find myself often seeking something that is immediately therapeutic, like a moment of meeting, mutuality, attunement, and again, as you're saying, sort of just meeting this person somewhere, wherever it is. So whether that's going into the delusions or, creating a space.
Or
Yeah.
into yourself,
Oh,
or into yourself, maybe even more importantly, being very much in touch. You talked about the sensory experiences with what it means to you, what it's doing to you to sit with this person. And that can also be very informative. Not always looking outward, not always looking at the patient, but feeling what is it like to sit with this person? What am I picking up? What am I feeling? Am I feeling fear? Am I feeling disgust? Am I feeling like I want to run away? Am I feeling confused? Am I feeling helpless, hopeless? All of these things can happen when you're sitting with some of the things you just described. And allowing that to wash over you, to go into you, to be aware of what those feelings are like. What do you notice? Even in word salads, people repeat themselves. They repeat a lot of themes. You can start picking out themes and think, okay, I don't know what the hell they're saying, but they keep repeating this word, and that must be significant, right?
Danielle said, and maybe an error of the book altogether, is that it presents the myth that if you just know what you're doing a little more, like finding the words and word salad and what the connection is. I hope we haven't communicated this, because the precursor step to finding is being lost. And if you can't begin with an appreciation of being lost and how your efforts to find yourself may be directing your treatment interventions, not always helpful to the patient, then you're at a beginning point.
right. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Both can happen at the same time.
Yes,
You can feel lost, but you can also pay attention to patterns.
agree.
Mark, do you want to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Okay, if I'm the right Mark, yes.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Thanks.
I have
Thanks.
to orient myself.
It's great to see Danielle. I've known her for years, and it's great to meet you, Michael. I haven't known you. Uh, One of the greatest starts to my career was my internship at Creedmoor in 1975, which was tail end of the days of people being in mental hospitals for decades, for lifetimes. And it was invaluable for me to do that. And, one of the great moments for me was there was a man about somewhere in his 40s who'd been there for since he was an adolescent, and he was considered a hebephrenic or a simple schizophrenic. Those were terms that were used at the time. He sort of wandered through the wards kind of aimlessly and repeated phrases over and over that made no sense to anyone. And I asked the staff if I might try a session with him, and they said, sure, anything, and I tried a kind of a traditional approach, didn't get anywhere. And he started repeating this phrase, which he'd used often, are we going to Staten Island? And for some reason, I said, are you in show business? I don't know where I got that phrase. And he said, are we going to Staten Island? And I said, I'm going to stick this out. And I said, are you in show business? And we went back and forth for 5-10 minutes or something, repeating our nonsense phrases. And at some point, he said, this is not a very interesting conversation. And I said, no, it really isn't. That's true. And I wish I could say that was the turning point of something. No, he went back to his phrases, but we both had a sense of, oh, there's somebody in there watching this, this show business.
Sanity Island, maybe instead of
was
the island of
delightful.
sanity.
Yeah, just wanted to share that.
Well, you were playful. You were that's an example of using play in the treatment,
Play and desperation.
Yeah, well.
And I have this general question for the group. Do they feel
Has a question.
competent about approaching patients? That's very important to both of us. And if not, what's missing?
Okay.
Larry,
Yeah.
you're muted, Larry.
I'm muted.
Okay, well, thank you for
Figured.
such a moving presentation. I'm interested in your thoughts about Lacan's notion that psychosis is not a pathology, it's a structure. It's a structure which has a wide spectrum. And Lacanians today are speaking about ordinary psychosis, which may include many people walking around the streets, and extraordinary psychosis, where there are hallucinations, delusions, very active, which we've been speaking about, the more extraordinary types of psychosis. Lacan was doing psychoanalysis with psychotics in the 40s and 50s. And his third seminar is all about the beginning of this, where he spends a lot of time looking at Schreber and Freud's thinking about Schreber, which he takes even further. In my understanding, the Lacanians do not use countertransference. It is not about what I happen to be feeling with this person in the room with me who may be floridly psychotic. What a Lacanian would do, as I understand it, is understand the transference as being to his or her own unconscious and listening in ways this person may never have been listened to before, such that what the person is struggling with and what's underlying the hallucinations or the delusions somehow comes to the surface, and we can begin to look at it together. But it's not about me and me intruding ever, so much as it's about hearing and listening and taking notes for what is being spoken, even if
I,
it means sitting in silence for months.
Yeah.
I have no idea what, am I muted?
No,
I hear
we
you.
hear you. We hear you.
Okay, I can be heard. I have no idea what listening means there because my experience is that if by listening to myself, I recognize that part of what I'm listening to in myself is being influenced by the other, and how I manage that influence by the other will affect my interventions, then I can really listen. But if I don't listen to how he's affecting me, I'm only partially listening, partially defending myself, partially staying away from being bewildered, etc. I don't get it. I don't see the dichotomy.
The Lacanian might call that the imaginary, listening to myself and getting caught up in what is being evoked in me. I may experience all of this, but that is not the way in which to reach the other, the psychotic.
How do you then discount the availability of information that the patient influencing you is providing you? For example, the patient who walks out of the room is not only walking out of the room, I want to know if I can accept that or not. And if I can't accept that, I know what to focus on for myself because I have to get beyond needing him to stay there with me. And what is he doing to push me away is another issue.
He may not be pushing you away so much as saying he's unable to tolerate anymore.
Fine, then that's what we'll find out.
Right.
But the way I'll find that out is I feel like you're pushing me away. Am I missing something?
Yeah, I guess a Lacanian would understand that as intruding your own experience onto the person you're with.
On the contrary, I'm saying to the patient, you're having an impact on me, a significant impact on me that will in turn influence my impact on you or what I do with you. It's a question of recognizing the mutual experience, not somebody hermetically sealed and an observer looking in on that container.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to add something to that. The Lacanian. I think Mike and I are not Lacanians, but he finds
Very
that.
good.
But I did review Lacan's theories of the unconscious. He did see it as a structure. He actually changed that later. One of the things I actually like that you mentioned is this ordinary or white psychosis that the Lacanians refer to. And, you know, I very briefly, you know, I think it's very, Darian Leader talks about the difference between being mad and going mad. So the going mad are the people who we see the symptoms and it's very clear, oh, here's a psychotic episode. But the being mad, there are a lot of people who are quietly mad, quietly psychotic, and function to some degree or at some level in our world. And I think that gets ignored a lot. And I appreciate the Lacanians who bring attention to that.
It's some of the greatest creative people in the world, like
Yeah.
James Joyce, totally
Yeah.
psychotic. Had it not been for his writing, which held him together.
Yeah, for a lot of creative people, the creative work holds, you know, contained and helps them in the world, function in the world. I also like the secretary function that the Lacanians use, that instead of, rather than interpreting and intervening in a certain way, that they see themselves as secretaries, you know, noting what is going on rather than interpreting what is going on.
Right.
And I think that that can be very valuable when working with psychosis. But just an aside, Françoise Davoine, who studied with Lacan, told me once that I don't know if she or someone else asked Lacan, you know, you seem to do well with psychosis. How do you account for that? And he said, I don't know, they get better, but I have no idea what I'm doing.
Right.
It's very
They are the leader. They lead us.
Thank you. Yes, fascinating seminar. I just was wondering if you had any advice on how do you deal with psychotic clients actively trying to get you to hate them, or advice on, you know, with the negative symptoms. That's where I feel myself taking on their psychosis, and I'm not sure how, you know, based on the Lacanian point of view, it would be one way. Based on, you know, joining the, like, I'm just any advice on when
Mike,
they
you
actually
take
put
this
it in
one.
you. Yeah.
Mike,
Yeah,
can you
Uh,
answer this one?
sure. Nobody likes to be hated much. Trump likes to provoke, but he doesn't like to be hated. So there's a distinction there. And I mention that because with psychotic patients, in my experience, their wish to have you hate them is a secondary wish. The primary wish is not to be invaded. And the hating makes you the enemy, which means if you're the enemy, I can defend against that. But if you care about me, I have no defense for that. I'm going to be invaded, intruded, and lose my identity as a person. That is my clinical experience with hatred. It's a defense. Now, I say that glibly, but if you're the therapist being hated and hated and hated, I think that's where supervision helps. Everybody wants to be loved a little bit. I want you to like my answers, right? I mean, that's human.
Well, but how would you react to them? Like, would you react to them with aggression, or would you react to them that, like, would you contain and
No,
reflect
because
back to them? Yeah.
I'll tell you why I wouldn't react to them with aggression, because that's taking their hatred as primary, not retaliating. But if I can get underneath that, and one of the ways you will get as the therapist underneath that is by tolerating that hatred. And that's why I suggest supervision. If you can tolerate, if you can contain, that's a good word for all our work. If you can contain the hatred, they're going to, after a while, be fearful of becoming close. And then they flipped, and then they revealed what the terror really is about. It's not about you, it's about them. And what it is about you is you're taking over them. They're disappearing. What better fence than hatred? Ah, go fuck yourself, you know, that kind of thing. Well, okay. That speaks to you go off and fuck yourself, and I'll be here in my safety. Isolation. And as we talked about earlier, isolation is not just a problem for the patient, but often, very often, begins with the major way of being.
Yeah.
Danielle?
There's a case in the book of severe hatred. A patient that I treated who hated his mother more than I've never seen mother hatred like that. And I knew that eventually it was going to come to me. I just hoped that, you know, it would take a little while and we could do some work until that point, which we did. It came later, but when it came with a force. Chapter 10. And this is a patient who would come in and if I smiled, he said, "Why are you smiling at someone who wants to kill you?" Or things like that. Or he had fantasies of bringing his mother back to life so that he could kill her. It was, you know, it was a treatment filled with hatred, and eventually a lot of that hatred came onto me, blamed me. He said, I blame you for everything. And I agree with Mike. It wasn't primary. Obviously, it was, you know, it was a need that he had, and he used me to as a vehicle for all of that hatred. But it can be very destabilizing to be the object of such intense hatred. Actually, Mike helped me with that patient. I don't know if you remember, Mike, but that was
Yeah, I do, now that you,
years ago. Years ago. Yeah.
yeah.
We have time for about one more question, so I just want
You
to
have to
ask
unmute,
Joe
Joe.
yeah, if Joe wants to unmute himself and
Firstly, I
yeah.
want to thank you both so much for this wonderful conversation. And I really felt like there were a lot of things that you each said in your own ways, which kind of came together for me. I really kind of think respect and courage are so critical in the way we think about psychotic people, because I think it takes a lot of courage to come into our offices, and that's
Yes.
worthy of a lot of respect. And also, I think, you know, so I really appreciated that a lot. What I don't think we have time to talk about this, but what I was curious about in like a couple of minutes is that a lot of people, I'm thinking about Beyond in particular, but Lacan does in a different way, talks about the concreteness and the inability to kind of think more symbolically that a lot of psychotic people have. And that for Beyond, it's a kind of a growth experience as opposed to for Lacan, it's a more absolute experience. So I was wondering if you could, in 1 minute or so, comment on that kind of concreteness of the language and experience of the psychotic.
Yeah, I'll say something first. The concreteness that's being expressed is the old Heidegger Das Ding an sich. It's the thing itself. It stands for itself. And the ability to abandon symbolism and to think in a manner that relies not on abstraction, but on concreteness. Remember the example of turning the chair around.
Yeah,
There's nothing symbolic about that. I mean, my God. So there is that necessity to give up the pleasure and the ease of working with neurotic patients. Because I personally love the idea that I can deal concretely with the person, because abstraction to me is as much suspect as anything. It's a way of concealing through subterfuge and eloquence and etc. Whereas concrete, the thing stands for itself. And the question with the concrete is not for me whether the patient is being obscure, but whether I can accept the concrete communication.
Jennifer, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, and I'm very sorry that I'm not putting myself on video. I'm getting over a cold and I'm in my PJs, so please forgive me. I'm not suitable for even virtual company right now. First of all, this was a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. And I can't wait to read the book. I was just curious though, you know, when you talk about sitting with a psychotic patient for months on end so as not to impinge upon him or her, you know, very often when you sit with somebody who is healthier, you know, it's expectable that they might get anxious if you're silent, but that they'll be able to do something with it. I was curious as to whether, with a psychotic patient, whether you have any signals from session to session as to whether they're getting too overwhelmed and lost in that silence, or whether they're still appreciating you not impinging upon them.
I think you have to pay a lot of attention to body language. You reminded me of something that didn't come up, and this was something that I think Mike and I are a little bit different here. Just as people, that I sit very easily with silence. And I think there are certain people, certain therapists who have a more schizoid type of personality who are actually fine sitting with silence, who don't have that need to do and to have an effect and to be responded to all the time, who actually can sit with that distance for long periods of time. People who meditate regularly also, I think, can sit in that place and be, we learn to just be and be aware and attend to cues and not feel the necessity of having to do. So I just wanted to say that it's not always a difficulty or an obstacle. Sometimes it's more of an obstacle to interact than to not interact, and just sit with a person and feel a certain intimate. It doesn't mean there's no connection. It may just mean there or no intimacy. Sometimes sitting alone with someone in silence can be the most intimate experience that can be. I once treated a sex addict who had sex with 3 people on the way to see me for a session. And then he would come in and sit and just want to be silent. And we would sit in silence for most of the session. And he felt such calm. It was the only time that he could feel like, okay, I don't have to do. And I didn't expect him to have to do. And so one can, for some people, it comes more naturally. For other people, you cultivate it. I think meditation is a good way to cultivate it.
Oh, yeah. I don't mean as the therapist, how do you do it? I mean, how do you detect whether the patient is starting to get lost and overwhelmed by the silence as opposed to appreciating the space that you're giving them?
They'll start being agitated. You'll start seeing some physical agitation. They may even ask, like, what are you doing? Why don't you talk?
Uh-huh.
So you see some change, even if it's a slight change in their physicality or their behavior. This is difficult with virtual, much more difficult with virtual.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure.
I agree with what Danielle has said. I would add my old pal countertransference to this as well, that when I feel, why doesn't he or she talk? Then I realize that I'm pressing, that I need something. And what is that communicating to me? And then how am I acting that out with the patient? I may become more directive. I may become more concrete in my questions. I may start talking. And the patient will notice that. And so will I. And as I perceive their squirming around my demandingness, I generally am able over time to get the message.
So we can we'll go to Richard if you want to unmute yourself, or just go a few minutes over, if that's all right.
Sure, yeah. And thank you everyone for this has really been a great talk. And I appreciate sitting in here. Apologies too if there's an echo. I don't know if others hear that as well. But I guess really my question is, sometimes we'll work with patients whose I think one of the benefits, so to speak, in working with those with psychosis is it's like working with someone who's living in their dream. And so sometimes the conflicts can be, quite apparent. I think one example that comes to mind is, we worked with this young male who, was admitted for recurrent, aggressive episodes toward other male peers because he kept thinking everyone was trying to sleep with his mother, and he was deathly afraid that his dad was part of a Freemason conspiracy to kill him. And so you'll encounter these cases where, by the nature of psychosis and kind of this lived dream, the conflicts can be, quite upfront. And so I guess the question I have around that is, what is the role, if any, in terms of sharing an interpretation to patients about what conflicts might be occurring? And if there is a role to it, what are maybe some signals or signs that the patient could be ready to hear it?
Mm.
Well, I'll say one thing. It's a complicated interaction because the appeal to omniscience often leads to withdrawal. That is, the patient at the same time is looking for a savior and looking to be isolated and not invaded. And how can I tell when I ask your opinion, as much as I want it to take over, how can I tell that my acceptance of what you think is the abolishment of my own ability to think, to be? Because remember that in psychosis, autonomy is crucial. And the defense that results in the protection is building a wall. So interpretation to me is very tricky. It's nothing I do early, nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we write, we have several chapters on the pre-alliance, particularly for people who you can't just start into treatment, who need a whole phase of treatment, treatment. So we look at a lot of different types of patients and how do you begin. But I think we agree, Mike and I, that interpretation is not great in the beginning, that we really want to create one of the most important emphases in the book is the creation of the therapeutic alliance. And in order to create that alliance, one has to really respect the patient, recognize the patient, meet them where they are, and not force our pace in any way, or even our understanding, more a curiosity, an interest, certainly an authenticity, but taking our lead from the patient and being very, working on attunement. Safety is very important in the beginning. So all of that is counter to interpreting. I got you. I know what's going on with you. And even if it's right, it's not going to advance that initial phase of establishing, a relationship that has mutual respect. And we try to see our relationship as one of collaborators. We give enormous amount of agency to the patient. And it's not, this authoritative, we are the know-it-alls. And that's why Mike keeps emphasizing that we cannot know anything really, and be comfortable with that. And we learn as we go, and we make mistakes. And so interpreting, I think, Pierre Olinier, a French psychoanalyst, wrote a book called The Violence of Interpretation. Interpretations can be experienced as violent, particularly by people who are sensitive and fragile, as many people with psychosis are. So
the phrase Danielle used is terrific. The emphasis, I'm now seeing things from the patient's point of view, is the patient hears the therapist saying, I got you. And what you're working toward is, I got you, which is the significance of and the validation of and the importance of the patient to the therapist of, I got you. But you can't start with that. You have to appreciate that the initial take is, I got you. And that is what the patient is withdrawing from, being gotten.
Right.
pinned down in a way.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Been fascinating, really, really thank you so much. It's been really thought-provoking, this talk. Really enjoyed our discussion this evening, and I want to thank you both on behalf of Adelphi Society for Psychoanalysis and Psychotherapy. I'd also like to thank ASPP President Megan Nolan, Elizabeth Sullivan, President-elect, and Danielle Eisenberg, the ASPP Secretary, as well as Leah Simonson, our Executive Assistant, for all their hard work in helping put this event together. And if you enjoyed tonight's presentation and you're not a member of ASPP, we just ask that you please consider becoming a member or making a small donation to support our community. And thank you so much, everyone, for coming tonight, and hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening.